All right, we are kicking off our summer opponent previews, and uh, please be joined by Melissa Triebwasser, who is the Frogs insider for Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Hopefully, I got that right. But you
Nailed it. Nailed
nailed
it.
awesome. So you cover TCU. You were part of that amazing run last year, and so first off, we chatted last year to preview the CU game. Things are way different on both sides now, but
Yeah.
I do want to start to say thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be here, Brian. Like you said, like it was just a little under a year ago that we sat down and had a conversation, and very different spots, very different expectations for our programs, and now we're both kind of sitting here with nationally recognized and acknowledged programs for different reasons, but in a very different spot than we were a year ago, and it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, well, I remember telling you that hey, Sonny's history is that he doesn't have a very good first year with a program. Well,
Yeah.
that was blown out of the water.
Yeah.
So, whatever analysis I did going into it was completely blown out of the water. But in fairness to me, I don't think anybody saw what was going to happen last year with TCU. And, you were more optimistic about what they could be. And certainly they end up being a pretty good football team. But I don't think anybody saw college football playoff.
No, even those of us with our most purple tinted glasses, kind of thought the ceiling, like if everything went right, this was a team that had an outside shot at maybe hitting 10 wins. But you were looking at a team that we were kind of in the mindset of, hey, if they make a bowl game, if they win a bowl game, awesome. If they get to 8 or 9 wins, then we know we're on the correct trajectory. And you started to kind of feel, that hypnotoad magic, so to speak, in October, and the comeback over Oklahoma State and the comeback over Kansas State, and just kind of, I will say it this way: there was nothing after that opening weekend in Boulder that made me think that TCU was going to do what they did, especially when Chandler Morris got hurt.
Yeah.
But it kind of got a little bit easier to believe, and once they got over the hurdle of Texas down in Austin in front of 100,000 on the primetime game, that's when we all kind of started to think, no, this might be something a little bit more. But yeah, if you had told me at the beginning of the season TCU was going to play and lose a Big 12 championship game, I would have been ecstatic. If you had told me they were going to make and win a college football playoff game, I would have never believed you. No shot.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny to think back to halftime of that game in
Yeah.
Boulder because at that point in time, TCU is winning 7-3, but their only touchdown was on a punt return.
Yeah.
CU's defense had completely shut them down. Now CU had not done much on offense, so they got a field goal. But here's the Buffs. They're shutting them down on defense. You're thinking, all right, maybe there's something going on with this defense. And then, you know, the rest starting the second half of that game, the rest of the season was completely different for both teams. I mean, TCU shredded Colorado on the ground in that
Yeah.
second half. And then obviously went on to do what they did. And Colorado obviously was horrible the rest of the season, had the worst defense in the country. It's hard to believe they shut down TCU for 2 quarters even in that game. But let's go back to that game a little bit in that Chandler Morris is a guy that we're going to talk about now because Max Duggan was the star of that team last year, but I think some people forget Chandler Morris won the job coming out of camp last year and started that game against Colorado. Did not do great. He looking at, let's see, 13 of 20, not bad, 111 yards, but not a whole lot of production.
Mm-hmm.
Gets hurt. Max Duggan comes in, only throws 3 passes that game because they're just running all over the place. But then Chandler hardly ever plays. I'm not sure if he played again, but he's now the guy, right?
Yeah, so it looks like, last year they came into it and everything was, oh, it's going to be a competition. It's going to be a competition. Oh, it's tight. It's 1A, 1B coming out of fall camp. But I think everybody kind of saw in practice that Chandler was performing at a much higher level than Max Duggan, but he was honoring his senior. I think he was trying to keep his senior a little bit happy and in the competition as well, because with the transfer portal, as you're well aware, things
Mm-hmm.
can change quickly and guys can leave. But it seemed pretty obvious that Chandler was the better thrower of the football. And based off of 3 previous years of watching Max Duggan work, that wasn't a surprise to anybody that's followed the TCU program. It was not surprising that Chandler started. It was very surprising how much better Max looked so quickly than Chandler did, even in that limited opportunity. Going into spring ball this year, I mean, it was Chandler Morris almost by default, because he had been the starting quarterback a year ago and would have been the starting quarterback if he hadn't gotten hurt. But also, if you look at TC's roster, there were 2 scholarship guys, period, at the quarterback position. And Josh Hoover, who had a really great spring, but is a young guy, still a little bit raw, a little bit of a project. It's probably not going to put up the level of competition. That being said, we saw Chandler Morris has played 2 seasons at TCU and hasn't made it through a second game in either of them. So because of injury. So They did go out in the portal and find the Oregon State transfer. Chance Nolan is kind of to back him up, but it looks like this is going to be Chandler Morris's job to lose. And barring injury, I don't anticipate anything happening in fall camp to keep him from being QB1 when they face off with Colorado in early September again.
Yeah, Buff fans know of Chance Nolan because they faced him a little bit with
Yeah,
Oregon State. So pretty. I wouldn't say an elite quarterback, but I think somebody that could probably, at least
great
push.
backup.
Yeah, at least push Chandler if he struggles a little bit.
Sure.
And like I said, if Chandler can't make it through season, probably a pretty solid backup. But we expect to see Chandler Morris in that opening game. So let's stick with the offense because that was such a big deal last year. I mean, that offense carried them through. The defense was not great, and we'll get to that. But the offense carried them through. They lost so many guys on
Yeah.
offense.
Yeah.
Whether it was through the draft or transfers, whatever. But they've also brought a lot of guys in, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody's used the transfer portal more than Colorado. We know that. But TCU's used it. They've got, as I was looking this morning, the number 20 transfer class in the country, which Colorado's number one. I get that, but number 20 is pretty good.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of good guys coming in. Three guys from Alabama, I think,
Yeah.
on offense. So what's kind of your thought on this offense? I still think a Sonny Dykes offense is still going to put up numbers.
Yeah. Oh, they're going to score. I mean, no matter what, I think you could pretty much plug and play almost anybody, and they're going to be able to put points on the board, assuming that they have a quarterback to kind of initiate everything. But I think it's going to be up to the offensive line. That's the big
Mm-hmm.
question. We went into last season not really confident what the offensive line was going to be because they hadn't really. It'd been a weak spot for the Horned Frogs for the last several years, but AJ Ricker's done an outstanding job as an offensive line coach. Sonny Dykes has a very friendly system, getting the ball out quickly. We saw that with Garrett Riley as well. We'll see that with Kendall Briles this year. They're going to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands, not ask the offensive line to be superhuman, which is good because you lost three guys from that unit. Two of whom, one of whom was a second round draft pick and Steve Avila, and you had a couple other veteran guys. So the offensive line can be good. Then I think the offense, there's so much talent at the skill positions. You lose a Quentin Johnson, you're not going to replace him, but wide receiver is still probably the deepest position
Mm-hmm.
on that team. You bring back a lot of experience in Savion Williams, who looks a lot like Quentin Johnston, is not as skilled as he is, but is another 6'4" guy that can really run. Who had some big moments last year. You bring in JP Richardson from Oklahoma State, who was not anybody that people got excited about until they saw him in practice and saw him in the spring game. And him and Chandler Morris have such a great chemistry. He's going to be that bailout guy. He's probably not going to be E for 60 yards down the field, although he's capable of it. But he's going to be the guy that's catching 6, 7, 8 balls a game. Jared Wiley comes back at tight end. That's just another incredible weapon at 6'7" and a guy that can just create space and made huge plays, especially on late downs last season for Max Duggan. And then you mentioned the Alabama guys. You got JoJo Earl coming in at wide receiver, who's a local kid from Aledo, dealt with some health issues at Alabama, but if he's healthy, he's outstanding. And then to replace Kendre Miller and Amari DeMarcado, you bring in a running back from Alabama, former 5-star, and Trey Sanders, who, same thing. He's had some pretty devastating injury issues, but he looks healthy. He looks comfortable in the system. He looks in shape. He'll have Amani Bailey and Trent Battle behind him as well. So the pieces are certainly there. If the offensive line can hang on, and they brought in Willis Patrick from Jackson State, who played for Deion Sanders, who's been great. You bring in Tommy Brockermeyer from Alabama. He's still kind of working his way back from injury as well. There's a little bit of a theme here with these Alabama guys. There's a reason that they left, right? They need a fresh start. But if that line can hold up, the work that Sonny Dykes did in the transfer portal on offense and that TCU has done recruiting on offense, there is no shortage of skill position guys that can put points on the board. It's just going to be a matter of A, who's going to deliver the football, and B, will there be time for that to happen? So I think that, you might not see some of the magic that you saw with TCU offensively, but there's certainly no reason to doubt that this team still can't be putting up 30 plus pretty regularly.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned Willis Patrick. I actually met him in December in Atlanta
It's a
before the
big
celebration.
dude.
Yeah, big dude.
That is a big dude.
Yeah, really nice young man. And actually, I
Yeah.
thought he was going to come to Colorado. So I was
Yeah.
surprised when he committed to TCU. But that's a huge and a great pickup for
Huge.
TCU.
Yeah. And I mean, especially when you look at where the weaknesses on that line, are, I think that was, it might not be the guy you hear about the most that comes out of the portal, but it may end up being the most important recruit out of the portal that TCU got. And I know it was a huge battle to get him away from Colorado and the handful of other programs that were going after him hard. So that was a huge win for TCU, AJ Ricker, Sonny Dykes, Kendall Briles, the whole crew.
Yeah, so I definitely think, that TCU offense, I agree with you. I think that's the biggest question mark people have because of all the people that are gone. But I agree with you. I think there's still a ton of skill and a Sonny Dykes offense. Colorado fans know that because they faced him at Cal. His offense is going to put up points, and so you still got to stop them. Now, defensively, TCU was not great last year, but they return a lot of guys this year, and Mark Perry being one of them, the former Buff. I imagine he's one of the leaders. But what do you like about that defense? And they added a couple pieces in the portal there as well.
So I think defensively, coming out of the Gary Patterson era, the 4-2-5, defensive head coach, one of the elite defensive minds in college football over the last 2 decades. People kind of assume because there was a drop off that the defense wasn't as good. And it certainly struggled at the beginning of the year. That's a completely fair statement. I would not say TCU was winning games because of what the defense did. But if you watch them kind of down the stretch of the season, as they started to adjust to Joe Gillespie's system and change from that 4-2-5 mentality to the 3-3-5 that they're using, I think that you saw guys get more comfortable, understand their roles better, and it improved. Was not a shutdown unit, was not a lockdown unit whatsoever. But look at what they did to Texas and Austin. They completely shut down that Texas offense. The only touchdown that the Longhorns scored was because of a Max Duggan strip sack fumble return. So they had big plays, even in the Michigan game where they gave up, just gobs and gobs of points. When they needed to stop, they got to stop. When they needed a turnover, they forced a turnover. And I think that's what this defense was. They weren't elite lockdown, but they were incredibly opportunistic once they got comfortable in the system. And that definitely took time. I mean, it's a huge change. It's a huge adjustment. I think it's always easier to adjust to a new offensive system than a defensive system for every position outside of maybe quarterback. And Max, and also credit to Sykes and Garrett Riley. They said, this is our guy now, Max Duggan. Let's tailor what we do to what he's good at. And on defense, it's a little bit harder to do that. You can't necessarily tailor your system to one or two specific guys' skill sets. But like you mentioned, they bring a ton of guys back. And especially if you look at the secondary, this secondary has a chance to be an elite unit, not just in the new Big 12, but in the country, just because of the talent and the athleticism that they bring back. You lose Travius Hodges-Tomlinson to the draft. He's one of the 375 professional football playing Horned Frogs down in LA, since it looks like the Chargers and the Rams only want TCU guys now, which is kind of crazy. But everybody else pretty much comes back. Josh Newton, they managed to get him to return. He was an all Big 12 level performer. He has a chance to maybe be an All-American, just one of the elite cover corners in the country, another transfer portal guy a year ago. Mark Perry, who we'll say struggled kindly in pass coverage last year, but excellent against the run, a hard hitter and an emotional leader. One of the highlights of my season, covering TCU last year was walking past Mark Perry. He was sitting in front of the bench at the Fiesta Bowl, just head in his hands in tears of kind of like no offense to Colorado fans, but this is why he left, right? Was to have an opportunity to have this kind of moment. And he was so emotional, and I'm so grateful. It was one of the greatest human beings. You told me how great of a person he was last year, and he certainly lived up to that billing. You've got Nook Bradford back, you've got Bud Clark back, you've got Abe Kamara back. There are so many excellent pieces in this secondary, and there's depth. They go almost too deep at every position, and so that, especially in the Big 12, is going to be a huge part of the success for this defense going forward. You lose a lot at linebacker. You lose a lot on the defensive line. And I think the defensive line is probably the biggest weakness for TCU going forward. You can't rush the passer. You're really going to struggle. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Joe Gillespie does in year 2, now having some familiarity with the majority of these pieces and these guys having some familiarity with his system. They can capitalize off the positive momentum that they got towards the end, like the last month or so of the season, and improve some things, tighten some things up, and get a little bit more athleticism, especially at pass rusher. I think that they have a chance to, not going to be a lockdown unit, but have a chance to be a really solid unit through the first 2 levels, and potentially an elite unit in the secondary.
Yeah, well, it sounds like that defense could be a little bit better. I don't think the offense is going to take the step back that people think. I don't know if this is a college football playoff team, but this is going to be a pretty good football team. The one that contends in the Big 12, and could potentially win 10 football games. And so I'm sure TCU fans are excited about what this program is. Even if it's not a playoff team, they got to be excited.
It's going to be really interesting because one of my favorite transition years between in the Gary Patterson era was the 2014 to the 2015 year, and TCU always used to have a slogan for the season. And the 2014 season, which was another kind of unexpected, excellent, should have been a playoff season by any TCU fans account, and it was prove them wrong. It was, hey, they don't think anything of you. TCU was picked, I think, to finish 7th in the Big 12 that year too. But it was prove them wrong, show them what you can do. And TCU had the opportunity to do that in 2022. They were picked 7th in the conference. Nobody was talking about them. Everybody thought, oh, Sonny Dykes year one curse, blah, blah, blah. But they went out and proved them wrong. And then, Gary Patterson next year in 2015 said, now it's time to prove them right. They don't believe you. It's easy. It's easy when no one has any expectations of you. It's a lot harder to live up to those expectations. And the transition for Sonny Dykes from having zero expectations and no one shining a spotlight to now being one of the teams that's in the brightest of spotlights is going to be interesting to see how he handles that. He's had good teams. He's never had a team that contended nationally like he did in his first year at TCU. And the fan base, they don't expect necessarily a playoff berth, but if you aren't in the mix for a Big 12 championship in late November, people are going to start talking. And,
Yeah.
If you aren't beating, like you don't want to lose to Texas the last time you get to play them in Fort Worth. You don't want to lose to Oklahoma, and get back on that. I mean, there are going to be a lot of expectations. I think most people believe that Kansas State will probably be, kind of the favorite. Texas is probably the most talented team in the Big 12 this year, but TCU is still going to be expected to finish in the top 3 or 4, I'd imagine, when the preseason media poll comes out. I think I'd pick them 3rd or 4th just to kind of couch my own personal expectations. But there is a lot of excitement. There's a lot of opportunity. Jeremiah Donati, the athletic director at TCU, did an outstanding job of capitalizing on not just the success of football, but basketball, baseball, rifle, everything in between, volleyball, beach volleyball, and fundraising is just hitting record numbers. Applications to university are hitting record numbers. So you kind of can't blow it. Like, you can take a small step back, but you can't backslide. And it's going to be interesting to see how Dykes, with, some staff changes and different things and a lot of personnel changes on the field, how he handles that and what he does to not necessarily match expectations, but be reaching towards that goal of looking pretty close to the success level you had in year one.
Yeah. Well, and that explains why that opener is huge for TCU, because, as much excitement and hype there is around Colorado, you cannot lose to Colorado in your home stadium, right out of the gates. I mean, the expectations will plummet for TCU, I think, at that point. Maybe not plummet. I mean, maybe they'll just rise more for Colorado. But one last thing, but that game, I mean, it is big noon kickoff. TCU deserves it because of the season they had last year. And it's obviously a big part of the reason why that game is on big noon kickoff is Deion Sanders. Not only because of who he is, but man, I mean, his history in Texas. He's a Texas guy. I mean, he grew up in Florida, but he's lived in Texas for so many years as an adult and played for the Cowboys, was such a star there. So one last thing for you. How excited are you and the TCU fan base for having that game, that time slot, with Deion coming there?
Well, I told you before we started recording that, I grew up in Northern California. I was a huge 49ers fan, and I was a big Major League Baseball fan. And my favorite athlete as a kid was Deion Sanders. I had the old Jerry Curl Atlanta Braves rookie card that he had. I can still picture it. I had a Deion Sanders poster in my room. I loved him when he played for the Niners, and because I grew up a Niners fan, I hated him when he played for the Cowboys. But I think it's kind of that same continuation of TCU was so irrelevant for the last, 4 years or so, and was so irrelevant for the first, 10 years, most of the first 10 years of Gary Patterson's tenure in Fort Worth. And before that, almost universally irrelevant. And so to see TCU get a marquee, showcase week one, to have not just the lights that are going to be shining on TCU, but bringing in all of the entourage that comes with Deion Sanders. It's a huge opportunity for Sonny Dykes, for TCU, for Jeremiah Donati, for the university as a whole, to say, we're not going anywhere. Maybe we're not contending for a college football playoff berth this year, but when it opens up to 12 again, we're going to be the class of the Big 12. We're going to be competing for Big 12 championships year in and year out. It's huge for recruiting because when Texas and Oklahoma leave, there's no reason TCU should not be the flagship university of that conference going forward for so many reasons. I mean, the opportunity is there. And so, like you said, you cannot lose to Colorado on big noon kickoff and Deion Sanders' first ever Power 5 game, a Colorado team that was not very good last year. And the expectations, the pressure is going to be huge. But I think we saw up until the last game of the season that this TCU program likes the spotlight and they like the pressure and they like the chip on their shoulder. And I think that everybody around Fort Worth is going to be so excited to see this team play. I'm imagining they're going to unveil the Fiesta Bowl banner in the stadium that day. I mean, it should be the kind of environment that we saw pretty much all season last year. And if you can start with that momentum and start with that energy around the program and then get a win with that national spotlight on you, it can set TCU up to maybe, be a contending team once again in 2023 and at least a team that's competing for an opportunity to play in a Big 12 championship.
Yeah. And then a topic for another day is that, hey, maybe this is a preview of a couple of Big 12 rivals again.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that because we keep that, man, there's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of smoke. And we've been hearing it for so long now that it started to kind of feel like it can't possibly be true. But let's just say it this way. I don't think either of us or anybody around college football thinks the realignment stuff is anywhere close to finished. So
no, it's probably not. And so there may be a chance that Colorado and TCU play more often in the future, but we'll see. And we'll talk about that if it does happen. But Melissa, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you down in Fort Worth on September 2nd, I think it is. So
yeah,
look forward to seeing you then.
Looking forward to it for sure.